This evening I'm going to talk on the subject of freedom. So as you want to be free, stick around and listen. Just wait for everyone to sit down first of all. One thing which I will announce though is that I know we've been having trouble with our microphone and sometimes people can't hear what we're saying. So those in the back over there, if you can't hear clearly what's being said, just wave at me or sort of point to your ears or let me know, because sitting here in this seat I can't really know whether you're hearing the talk or not. So if it is that you can't hear the talk properly, please wave at me or do something so that I can, something which is not rude, to let me know. Okay, this evening's talk will be on the subject of freedom. This is a subject or a concept which is very important in our Western world. Many people philosophize about freedom. It's something which our institutions try and quantify and protect for people, and it's something which is fundamental to the spiritual life and the inner happiness of people. However, it's something which many people just do not understand. And because they don't understand what freedom truly is, they will never find the path to freedom. When they don't know the path to freedom, they'll never achieve and experience freedom, nor will they know the bliss and the happiness which is generated by freedom. And so this is a very powerful idea and concept called freedom. I'm going to talk at length about it this evening. It's a subject which is obviously very close to the heart of meditating monks, because it seems to be almost contradictory that people can go and live in a monastery, and in a monastery where a monk lives is called a cell. The only other time you live in a cell is when you're in prison. You've got no freedom at all. In fact, we have a prison just up the road from our monastery, Karnak Prison Farm. We've got the wall. They've just got a wire fence. So sometimes, especially in the early days when we're building our monastery, that people would go past our monastery into the prison farm and ask, where are the monks? Thinking that that was our monastery. It actually happened quite a couple of times, I was embarrassed to say, and I was very pleased that the prison officer said, there's no monks here. And for many people, the idea of being a monk or a nun, when you can't do this and you can't do that, for them would feel like you're making a prison for yourself in your life. And indeed, that the last time I gave a talk here 2 weeks ago, I was telling everyone about the 6-month silent retreat which I did at my monastery in Serpentine. A time when I was separated from all contact with other human beings for 6 months. And I never spoke a word to any human being, nor saw them. And I recall that in the history of Australia, they used to send the very worst criminals to the island of Tasmania, I think to Port Phillip Bay or something. And the very worst of the worst criminals, I think there was one fellow who was so bad that all the terrible floggings which they gave him never seemed to do any good. And so as a last resort, they sent him to an island off the coast, alone, thinking that separation from human company was even worse than such terrible beatings. And there are such things as Geneva Conventions and human rights conventions. And I would think that, as I said 2 weeks ago, if anyone put someone in solitary confinement for 6 months, you'll be breaking so many laws and conventions, you'll be in big trouble. However, please do not dob in the Buddhist Society of WA to the Human Rights Commission that they made me, they didn't make me, but that I spent such a long time by myself. I mention that to many people, just what I've been doing, because I like to see people's reactions. And they say, how can you do that? Surely that would be self-torture. Now, don't you get lonely Don't you get bored? Don't you get frustrated? And the idea of being in silence for such a long time would be like a self-imposed prison. But the reality of the experience is no idea of being in a prison. There's no idea or sensation of being confined or being tortured or punished. But in that situation, there's a huge feeling of freedom. It's just like being in a monastery, that I feel much freer than I ever felt in lay life. Before I was a monk, I was a student and a school teacher, and I used to enjoy doing things which everyone did at that age, and I never felt freedom. The hippie movement, of which I was a part, as I mentioned here to you before, I too had my green velvet trousers, hippie beards, a beard and long hair. It was when my mother told me to get my hair cut, and I did, and became a monk. She said, "That's not what I meant by getting your hair cut." But even though that was a movement where you were supposed to have freedom, you know what they used to, those of you old enough, you remember the catchphrase, "Let it all hang out." Remember that one? But what actually hung out was a lot of suffering and confusion. There's no freedom there at all. And in our day and age, that we try, our governments try to give freedom to the people in their countries and their lands. But do you really feel that in all the years that you've been alive in a country like Australia, or whatever other country you've been in, do you really feel that you've gained freedom? Or do you really feel that life is containing you, pressuring you, putting enormous burdens on your back, pushing and pulling you, as if there is some tyrant, some slave master who you haven't really seen yet, who's always giving you just so many things, so many tasks and chores which you have to do? That's what a slave master is, telling you, come here, go there, do this, clean that. There is a tyrant which stops us being free. And even though we live in a country where those tyrants are not our politicians, they are not sort of secret police, still there is still a tyrant in a country like Australia, in Perth, which stops us feeling free. There may have been times of your life when you felt freedom. Do you remember a time, maybe when you were very young, when you felt so free, as if there was nothing pressing you, nothing pulling you, nothing containing you? I remember such times as a young child, and they were times of deep feelings of contentment. It took a while to really understand why it was I felt free in such situations. And eventually the answer came to me from one of the favourite stories and tales which I like to tell of a Friday evening. I tell this tale because it's a real occurrence in the life of our monastery. And it's a story which, the more I tell, the more I get information or understanding about what freedom really means. It was a time when one of our monks went to teach meditation in one of the jails. It was in the new jail of Casuarina. I was already too busy with doing other things, so I gave up all the jail teaching to one of our monks. And he used to go there regularly, I think once a week. And after about 6 or 7 weeks of teaching in this jail, the prisoners in his meditation group became so familiar with him and so friendly with him that one afternoon, after the teaching, there was a few minutes left, they started just to talk about what it's like living in a monastery. And it was that then he told the lifestyle of a monk in my monastery down at Serpentine to the prisoners. He told them there was no television down there, no videos. There was no weekly movies. There was not even a radio. There was no music or CDs. The monks weren't allowed to sing, nor were they allowed to play guitars or pianos. Moreover, you had to usually sleep on the floor or a low bed. And it was only one meal a day. You didn't even get anything to eat in the afternoon. And if it was a cup of tea, sometimes you just had to take what you were given. And sometimes there was nothing else to have. And even the food which you had, sometimes you had to put it all in the same bowl. You couldn't have a plate for your sweets, and it got all mixed up. And when this monk started to tell the prisoners of what it was like in a monastery, the prisoners were so surprised and then shocked, and then they felt sympathy for the monk so much they said, "That's terrible. Why don't you come in here and stay with us?" They'd forgotten what they were saying and where they were. They were in a prison. They were inviting the monk to come. Because in a prison you get 3 meals a day, you get very soft beds, you get sort of televisions, computers, music. There's so many things which you can do in a prison. And compared to our monastery, that a prison is just luxurious. That's why I'll be never afraid if I ever go to jail, because it'll be so comfortable in there. Not that I ever go to jail except to teach. But the result of that story was a very deep understanding of the meaning of freedom and its opposite being in a prison. Because if you want to understand any concept in the world, such as freedom, sometimes the best way of investigating it is from its opposite. In the same way, if you want to understand what peace is, look what disturbance is. If you want to understand what happiness is, look at suffering. Because by looking at its opposite, you can get great insights. If you want to know what light is, look at dark. If you want to know what dark is, look at light. If you want to know what freedom is, look about being in prison. What makes a prison? In the jails of Western Australia, it's very comfortable, but no one wants to be there. If they get a parole or a release or the appeal is upheld, they don't sort of stick around for another few days to stay with their friends. They get out as soon as they can. They don't want to be there. In a monastery, every year we tend to be full up. For our ladies' guest house, this year was booked out a couple of years ago. 2003 is already booked, and so is 2004. So people are just queuing up and booking 2 years in advance to stay in Bodhinyana prison. Well, they just eat 1 meal a day and they've got no television. And they have to do what they're told. And they've got to be quiet. Why is it? It is because, first of all, what freedom means is you want to be there. If a person is in a jail, in Casuarina prison, or in Canning Vale, or in Alcatraz, that's not there anymore, but any other top security jail, if you want to be there, if you're happy there, if you're content there, then it is not a jail. If you're at home with all of your DVDs and queen-size beds and modern kitchens, so you can actually ring out, you don't even have to cook a pizza these days, you can pick up the phone and order one. With all of those comforts, do you feel free? If you don't want to be there, if you're not content and happy where you are, then you are in prison. Wherever you don't want to be, that is prison. Wherever you want to be, that is freedom. And that is the difference between freedom and being in prison. Many people who come here are very concerned about relationships. In the world out there, it's a huge thing about having company, learning to live with somebody else. One of the comments I've got from people is, 6 months by yourself. Don't you get fed up with yourself? Don't you get bored? And I'm very happy being by myself or being with people. It's because of contentment, by wanting to be alone if you're alone, wanting to be with someone else if you're with someone else. Any relationship becomes a prison for you if you don't want to be there, if you want to be somewhere else. then the relationship becomes sort of confining. It's not the person you're with, it's just a feeling in your heart. Sickness, the relationship with yourself. If you're happy with your sickness, and that's a radical thing to say, but you can be happy with sicknesses. Sicknesses have many advantages. Now, your partner can care for you and look after you. And it's marvellous actually looking after and caring for somebody else. And as a monk, people actually love when a monk is sick. They've got someone to look after. To the point that many years ago, a monk, a friend of mine, was visiting his mother in Chicago, that's right. And being a very cold city, it was in the winter time, he slipped on the ice and broke his leg. He went to hospital straight away. When his mother found out, she came into the ward where his bed was with a big smile on her face. She said, "Now I've got you where I want you." He was a big boy, he was a monk in Thailand, now he was in hospital and he couldn't run away. She could mother him for a couple of weeks. She was blissed out. I think you can understand why. Because like when you're sick, you're given the advantage or the opportunity to other people to care for you. That's why it's nice to be sick sometimes. So that if you want to be sick, then you're not imprisoned by your ill health. It doesn't feel confining to you. It's not this huge problem anymore. You can be sick and still feel free. When you have that feeling of freedom there with your sickness, you don't mind it being there. It's like you're in a prison. Prisons are usually supposed to be uncomfortable. But sometimes people get used to it and they get comfortable there, they get content, and then they find happiness there and peace there. Now this is like with a body which is being sick. The freedom comes from letting go of trying to make it different. The wonderful thing happens when you do this with, say, sickness. When you really let it go, you're content with the sickness starts to disappear. It's one of those strange things. The more you try to get rid of it, the more it's a prison for you, the worse it becomes. One of the reasons is because so many of the sicknesses of human beings is caused from the mind. Stress. What that stress means, you know what stress means, you can feel it, can't you? I don't want this, I want it to be different. Controlling, I don't feel happy here, I want to change it, I want to change my partner, I want to change my body, I want to change Ajahn Brahm, I want to change the carpet, I want to change the heat, I want it cold, I want it hot. I want to change the government, I want to change the world, I want to change my financial situation, I want to be rich. Rich people want to be richer. The richer people want to be the most rich. Everyone wants to change something. Who's actually content? Who's happy where they are? Who's not in prison? The other story about freedom, which I'm going to bring up right now, well, again, one of my favourite stories is the story of the wishing game. I told this the other day at some Thai people in the monastery. Again, it's a powerful story, and I recycle these stories again and again because I want you to remember them. Because each story, when you look at it, you can always get more and more insights from them. The story of the wishing game goes like this. There was a group of, I think, 5 children. They were playing the wishing game. It goes like this. If you had one wish, what would you want? If I could grant you that wish, let's make it real. If I could grant you one wish, what would you ask for? In this game, the first child said, if I had a wish, I would wish for an ice cream. He was only a small child, and he liked ice creams, and it was a hot day. The second child, having heard that one wish, said, if I had a wish, I would wish for an ice cream factory. Because having an ice cream factory, if you own an ice cream factory, you can have an ice cream whenever you wanted. Now, as soon as the second child said that, the first child thought, what an idiot I was. And how clever was that second child? Oh, if only I could have that wish over again. But in life, you can't have a wish over again. The third child did even better than the second child. The third child said, if I had a wish, I'd wish for $1 billion. Because with $1 billion, you can buy an ice cream factory. You can also buy a candy factory. You can also buy a fish and chip shop. You can buy so many things. And so you can have ice cream whenever you want, candy whenever you want. You can buy a pizza chain, have a pizza whenever you want. He said, and the second child thought, how stupid I was. If only I could have my choice again, I would wish for $1 billion. Now, I'd interrupt here. Those who haven't heard this story before, what would you wish for if you had one wish? If you had one wish, what would you wish for? The fourth child was smarter than wanting $1 billion. He said, if I had one wish, I would wish for 3 wishes. And with my first wish, I'd wish for an ice cream factory. With my second wish, I'll have $1 billion, thank you. And for my third wish, I'll ask for 3 wishes. So whatever I think about later on I can have that for my, keep on going. And the other 3 children thought that was perfection. How can you do better than that if you had one wish to ask for 3 wishes? Because you can keep on wishing, get whatever you want again and again and again and again. Now those of you who haven't heard what the 5th child said, because the 5th child beat all the other 4 children. They had one wish which was more profound, gave them more happiness than that 4th child, who had an infinite number of wishes. In our world, we always want to be that 4th child. We want to be billionaires. So whenever we have a wish, we can always get that wish. We want to be able to go wherever we want, to experience whatever we want, so that we have so much money, so much power, that whenever we have a wish, we can get it straight away. We always like to aspire to the 4th child. That is the world. The 5th child said, if I had one wish, I wish that I didn't ever need any more wishes. I wish for the end of wishing. Because when you have the wish for no more wishes, that's called contentment. That's much better than always wanting a wish. Whenever you want a wish, it means you're not happy where you are. You're not content. You're not free. You're not happy where you are. You are still in a prison. When you have no wishes, you're happy where you are, you're content. That is what we call freedom. That last child was the Buddha. No more wishes. Imagine what it would be like to have no wishes. Absolutely content. What that really means is the real meaning of freedom. Freedom from desire, not freedom of desire. When you have desire, wanting, that is why we never feel free. Look at it in your daily life. You want to get to work on time. You don't feel free. Now you want to get on in the world and become wealthy. That means that from Monday to Friday and probably during the week, you're not free. Now you want to have health in the body, and you're not healthy. Therefore you don't feel free. You feel there's a tyrant there. Even you've got pain in your legs. You don't want pain in your legs. That's why you're always being pushed and pulled. You never feel free. You're not content with your partner, so you never feel free. You always have to try and find another one. Or even with your mind. You're not content with your meditation. You want it to be different. You want your mind to stop thinking. You don't want it to be this way. You don't want it to be that way. You're always trying to control the world. That is why you don't feel free. You don't have to change the world to be free. You don't even have to change yourself to be free. All you need to do is to let go of all changing and all wishing. Then you feel freedom. Which is why it was a strange experience when I first became a monk. Being a monk, I had all these rules I had to keep. They say that there's 227 rules for a monk, but that's only the start of it. Then you get more as you go along, as you read deeper and deeper into the teachings of the Buddha, and especially the rules for monks. And sometimes you think, all these rules, in our day and age when we talk about freedom and just not being hung up on things and liberating your mind, how can you feel free with all those rules? Aren't you always worried about doing something wrong? The answer is actually no. The more rules you keep, the freer you feel. Strange, but that's the truth of it. If you have no rules in your life, no self-discipline, anything goes, try it for one day. You feel just so uncomfortable, so lack of freedom. One of the lovely things when people come to visit the monastery and stay for a time, they've got all these rules they have to keep, and they keep them because they feel just so free. They feel so much space. The reason is because they're free from so many problems. It's why that we call this basic morality freeing yourself from so many difficulties. One of the other stories about precepts is a story of the fish in the aquarium. It's another powerful story which shows you why it's good to keep moral precepts in our life. The story goes like this. There were two monks. Actually, one of those monks visited here very recently. There were two monks visiting a house where they were waiting for their morning meal, sitting in the lounge room. They saw a fish tank. And one of the monks said straight away, "That is not compassionate. That is not Buddhist to put fish in a tank." Do many of you have fish in an aquarium in your house? What have the fish done to be put in a prison like that? It's like a prison. They can't swim here, they can't swim there, can they? And so you've got these fish confined in a little tank in your house for your pleasure. So surely that's, should liberate them. Go and take them out to a river or a lake. That's what one monk thought. That was un-Buddhist. That was cruel to put fish in an aquarium, in a house. The other monk was much wiser, said, "No, you're wrong. You don't understand. Because fish in a tank have a lot of freedom. First of all, they're free from fishermen. Have you ever seen someone dangling a line and a hook in a fish tank in a house? They're free of the danger of fishermen. Number two, they're free of bigger fish, the fear of bigger fish. Because no owner in their right mind will put sort of a big fish and a little fish who eat one another in the same tank. In the rivers and the lakes, the fish have got to be very afraid. If they see a big fish, they've got to run as fast as they can, because big fish eat small fish. Also, if a fish in the rivers and lakes see a little worm in there, that's their food. It might be a fly. That's what they eat. They don't know. They can't be sure whether that worm has got a hook in it or that worm hasn't. They've seen many of their friends eat a nice juicy worm and suddenly be jerked out of their lake, never to be seen again. And imagine what it would be like that. If you had dinner, you never knew when you have your dinner where there's a hook in there, and would that be your end and your death? You get psychotic. I reckon that many of the fish in the lakes and the rivers are psychotic, because they never can be sure that what they're going to eat is going to be their end, their death, or whether they can have a nice meal. You can never really enjoy your food, can you, as a fish? But the fish in an aquarium, they fear the danger of bigger fish, they fear the danger of fishermen, and also whatever food they eat there, they know it's safe. Not only it's safe, they don't even need to search for it. It's like takeaway, or like home delivery pizza, delivered twice or three times a day. They don't have to work at all. It's there for them whenever they want. So they're free of hunger. Not only are they free of hunger, but if ever those fish get sick in the aquarium, the owner gets a fish doctor to come and heal them. They've got free medical care. Even in our community, we have a certain amount of free medical care, but we've got like excess we have to pay if we go in hospitals. Fish don't have that excess. It's absolutely free. The best medical care you can possibly get. Also, they've got air conditioning. An aquarium has got this thermostat heater on it, so it's just the right temperature. I don't know about you coming into this hall today. It was very cold outside. This afternoon I did a funeral and it was blowing and raining on the way to the crematorium in Fremantle. It was really cold. Fish have got a much better life than that in an aquarium. They never feel heat or cold or too hot or too cold. It's exactly the right temperature. So if you look at it that way, fish in an aquarium are free from so much suffering, so many problems. Now do you understand what freedom means? Sure, they can't go and swim to all these different places. They're free of so many problems. That's why in Buddhism and other religions, we look upon like keeping moral precepts not as confining you, not as putting you in a cage, but actually liberating you, freeing you. You feel much more free keeping rules because you are free of so many dangers, of so many problems and so many difficulties. That's why the more precepts you keep, the more freedom you feel. Ask someone who's been coming to our Buddhist center for a long time and who keeps the 5 precepts of not killing, not stealing, not committing adultery, not lying, not taking alcohol. That must be terrible not to. You can't have freedom to have a nice beer or a nice bit of wine in the afternoon. You feel more freedom by giving up those things. Number 1, you're free from fear of the booze bus when you go home. You're free of fear of liver problems. You're free of fear of not having enough money because all that costs a lot of money. If you tell lies, then you're always worried about being caught out. If you don't tell lies, you always tell the truth. You're free from the fear of getting caught and all the problems which come from bad speech. You find you're free of so many things if you keep precepts. That's why keeping precepts gives you such a sense of freedom. If you start practicing compassion for other people, going out helping and serving others, and sometimes you think, why are you spending so much time at the hospice, old people's home, or monastery or church doing this and helping out that? You haven't got any time for yourself. People think freedom is having free time. Do you have free time? What does it mean, free time? It means time when you feel free. Not time when you can do whatever you want, because what happens if you've got, say, an afternoon, you've got nothing to do? A lot of times people get bored out their skull. Turn on the television, there's nothing on today. Look at the CDs, no, listen to all that, that's really boring. Go into the refrigerator, which is packed solid with stuff, there's nothing in the refrigerator. Go and ring up a few friends, and they're all out. How many people get bored on a day off? You don't feel free, do you? Even though it's supposed to be free time. It's not free time because you don't feel free. A lot of the time, if people are serving others out of compassion, they feel free because they're free from worrying about themselves. This whole idea of yourself, you, and who am I, what am I supposed to be doing, that's all taken away when you're acting out of compassion because your focus is on somebody else. There's a sense of freedom there. Freedom from your own desires because you're concerned about another person. That's a lot of times why, when a person really has love for another person and they experience that feeling of love, there's always a sense of freedom there. an uplift of the mind and the heart, because they're not so worried about themselves. They're wholly concerned with the other person. A mother looking after a baby, how much time does she spend with that child? Waking up in the middle of the night 2 or 3 times, all day having to be concerned about their baby. There's a sense of freedom there, because you're concerned not with yourself, but with somebody else. One of the reasons why, in our day and age, people get psychotic, again, is because they're too involved with themselves. They don't know how to be at peace with themselves or feel that freedom. And they get worried about guilt and fear and anxiety and loss and grief. These are all internal things. They don't know how to deal with themselves. One way to overcome depression is actually to go and do some work for somebody else. To fight depression with compassion. Because when you develop compassion, you're sending that obsession with you're ending the obsession with yourself, and you're giving out to somebody else. I have found, just as a general rule of thumb, that those people who serve, who are compassionate in the world, tend not to be depressives. You go out to other people. When you give to other people, you get so much back in return. What you get back in return is energy, is happiness, and that completely stops depression. Become free of those things. It seems to be the more you serve, the more you give, the freer you feel. Not if you have all the time by yourself, but if you give to others. And as you take freedom even further, you start to, when the times when you aren't serving others, when you're by yourself, when you're with yourself, that's when you have to face some of these guilt, anger, fears, whatever else is in the mind. And when we're by ourselves, sometimes we feel no freedom at all, because these qualities of the mind, again, concern us so much, they become such a huge problem. We never feel free from them, because we don't know how to deal with them. We try again to get rid of our anger. We try to overcome our fear. We try and do something about these problems. And the more we try and control and do, the worse it becomes. One of the great ways of overcoming fear, anger, restlessness, is just to leave it alone. To be content. To be afraid. To be content. To be restless. To be content. To be bored. If you can actually do that, you are actually undermining the very cause of those negative qualities. When you have contentment there, the whole edifice of restlessness, fear, completely disappears. That's why sometimes some teachers will say, well, what's wrong with being afraid? What's wrong with it? Just be afraid. Enjoy it. Have fun. What's wrong with being, say, depressed? When we think it's wrong, we get depressed about being depressed. And then we get depressed about being depressed about being depressed, and depressed about being depressed about being depressed about being depressed. And I'm just so depressed about being depressed about being depressed about being depressed. We just dig ourselves into this huge hole of negativity. So instead of doing that, I'm going to enjoy being depressed. Now, of course, as soon as you start to be content enjoying being depressed, depression is gone. The same as the way I overcame boredom. Because being in a monastery, there's nothing, actually something did go on last Thursday. It's just I'm going on a complete tangent. Because last Thursday afternoon we had the tactical response group and police helicopters swarming all over our monastery. I'm not sure if you saw the news last night or the paper this morning, but there was the most wanted criminal in Western Australia. It wasn't me, but it was someone who was actually hiding out in the land next to our monastery. You know, just a few hundred meters from our boundary. And the policeman came to see me on Wednesday, one of the detectives, and actually let me know what was going to happen. And actually were asking me questions. So actually for the last, from Wednesday till Thursday, I was helping police with their inquiries. And apparently on Thursday afternoon, actually we saw the helicopters and all the noise. They swarmed into the land next to our monastery and arrested the fellow. Really exciting. Nothing much happens in the monastery, but seeing the tactical response group and police helicopters swarming all over the place is really exciting. All the monks really loved it. So you don't have to actually need to buy a television. You can actually see real life in a monastery. So, what was I saying? That's right, yeah, being in a monastery, being bored. So, sometimes you sit in meditation, like 6 months of retreat. No one to talk to, no newspapers. I had some books. They were the Buddhist sutras in Pali and their translation. That's all the books I had there. But no letters, no telephone calls, no emails. You think you get really bored out of your mind. The way I overcame boredom is investigating boredom. You know, boredom could be really interesting. Now, what boredom feels like, where it comes from, does it change? Now, is there different levels of boredom? Now, really bored, super bored, mega bored, or an overboard? When you start to investigate these things, it becomes really interesting. You can actually do a study on boredom. And of course, as soon as you start to investigate these things, instead of feeling negative about boredom, you start to make it interesting, and it's not boring anymore. It's beautiful peace. Instead of being afraid, what is actually fear? Fear is, the symbol I give for fear is like being chased by a ghost. There's a ghost right behind you now. And are you afraid to turn around? You keep running away. That's what fear is. There comes a time with fear when you turn around and look at the ghost, straight in the eye. And you go, boo. And the ghost runs away. You're saying boo to fear. Ghosts are much more scared of you than you are of them.